what's something that you once tried to buy but couldn't?
There have been plenty of times where I've tried to spend a penny and I've struggled greatly.
Oh dear.
I've got locked in a few toilets, so like the process of buying was okay, but then it's just like you feel like you're locked in a contract almost with the facilities.
Like iCloud storage.
Like iCloud storage.
Which Apple users would have. You just get locked in. Once you buy, you can't go back. You can't.
Where else are you going to store?
Yeah, exactly. It just gets bigger and bigger. I've got a terabyte now that I pay for.
Yeah.
$7.99 a month. I'm getting bent over backwards. I'm getting bent over a barrel by Apple.
Lucky them.
Good day, Emily Swaddle.
Good day, Tom Praviti. Welcome to the Carbon Removal Show.
Welcome back, listeners.
Welcome to part 2 of our Buyers mini-series. How are you feeling about it, Tom?
I'm loving it. This feels sort of like my bread and butter, if I'm honest. I do tend to nerd out on this sort of stuff. So we've got great guests, the chat is flowing. But yes, I'm here for it.
That's good to hear, Tom. Because we've got 2 more episodes to get through. 1 down, 2 to go.
Last time, we tried to understand why anybody in their right mind would ever be so silly as to choose to buy carbon removal. We talked about belief, corporate responsibility, and strategy.
And you, Tom, had quite the turnaround last episode. You were passionate, nay, obsessive, about the objective madness of buying CDR right now. That it doesn't do anyone any financial good. And then by the end of the episode, spoiler alert to those who haven't listened yet, you were telling me about all the potential economic benefits. WTF.
Plot twist. What's a story without a plot twist?
That's true.
It was a ride, quite a ride. I have strong opinions and I hold them lightly.
That's admirable. I like someone who can change their mind.
I was genuinely fascinated, though, by Paolo's take on contemporary CDR purchasing, offering a competitive advantage.
Yeah, for sure. We covered a few different motivations for choosing to purchase CDR and got a generally clearer picture of the palette with which organisations may colour their decision-making process, if you will.
But wanting to buy something and actually doing it are 2 very different things.
Indeed.
Because buying carbon removal is not a plug-and-play procurement decision. It's complex, technical, reputationally sensitive, and of course, ever-evolving.
Mm-hmm. Episode 1 was about addressing the foremost friction to buying, choosing to spend money on this madness. And if you thought that making the decision to buy was tricky, well, I'm sorry to tell you that you've got many more decisions to come. It doesn't stop there. In this episode, we're going to explore all the frictions that come next.
We are stepping inside the deal room, Dragon's Den style.
I've actually never been in a room where a CDR deal has happened, where a deal has been made. I've never been in that room before. It's quite exciting to be
We're in a
room, but
where CDR is happening.
In this room.
We're not dealing with buying, but we are talking about buying.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of rooms where people have talked about CDR, Tom. I'm saying I've never been in a room where an actual deal has been made.
Where hands have shook.
Yeah, where like pen to paper, bish bash bosh. This is the deal. Never been in that room before.
Well, I have.
Congratulations.
And a lot of listeners on the show may well have been in these various rooms where deals have happened. But we promise this mini-series isn't just for those newcomers, and you're definitely going to want to stick around for the insights from our guests for sure.
And who knows? We may end up answering that question about the buying process that you're just maybe too afraid to ask. Not calling anyone out in particular, but maybe.
It's never a stupid question. No such thing.
Okay, to make sure we're all on the same page, I think we need to start with understanding what buying CDR actually involves. It actually kind of sounds like simple enough, you know? But I know that it's way more complicated and all that. And Tom, like you've personally, as you say, been in the room where it happens. You've become quite the salesman for carbon removal over the past few years. You've sold CDR in a couple of different contexts. First through a marketplace and now directly as a supplier. So you know the purchasing process quite intimately, I imagine.
I think I've had a pretty unique experience when it comes to selling carbon removal, both in those different contexts. So During my time at Supercritical, I was acting as an intermediary or a marketplace, so connecting buyers with a range of CDR projects. Now, in that role, the job, you're sort of part educator, part consultant. Companies are coming to you to try to understand the landscape. What are the different methods? What's credible? What fits my budget or geography? And it was my job to help to answer those questions. So effectively, you're helping them figure out how they want to buy. And because those companies are often speaking to several marketplaces at once, it can feel quite cutthroat and competitive.
I imagine.
On the other side, with my project developer hat on via Restored, things are quite different. Firstly, I'm presenting our project, well, my baby, as opposed to a portfolio of solutions. The conversation sometimes goes deeper into the project specifics when you're speaking to a buyer. As a developer, you're inviting this buyer to believe in and support you. And honestly, I actually really quite like that.
In that instance, it's really like you're actually having to sell yourself as much as you're having to sell the project, because you're leading the project.
Exactly. And so I guess to summarize that, there are more ways than one to buy carbon removal. And, you could argue there isn't really like a set model for doing it yet.
Yeah, this isn't your average just pop to the shop and pick up some CDR kind of purchase. It's more like buying a property, maybe. Sure, you might sort of shop around for anything that you're going to buy, but property purchases in particular can happen in so many different ways and require much more consideration, especially around stuff like due diligence and regulations. And from what I've heard, it sounds like quite a saga. I don't know if it's worth buying a property.
Oh, God, I haven't even tried.
I've heard it's harrowing.
For CDR, the way that you purchase might be influenced by factors like your company's structure and culture, who has responsibility for buying within your organization, and even your motivation for buying in the first place, which we covered last time.
Even though there are so many ways that this could go, there are going to be some common features, right? Like, what steps will most buyer pathways share?
Totally. Well, we did cover the first step in our last episode.
Yeah, sure. Deciding why you want to buy CDR. That's the first important step.
Exactly. Why you're buying and what you want to achieve. Then I guess the next question might be around quality setting. How are we defining good in this process?
Yeah, it's very important to know what success looks like before we dive into this.
And following from that, you can get into some of the more practicals. Things like choosing who you'll work with to buy. Do you go direct or do you go with the intermediary? Choosing how you're going to buy. Do you follow the Oxford offsetting principles or take the beyond value chain mitigation approach? Deciding budgets, conducting due diligence and project selection. You're obviously going to go through the fine print of contracts, legal work, and finally payment. Which budget lines in a business will this come from and how are you going to treat that?
Wait, there's also one more step after that, I believe.
What have I missed?
Communicating about the purchase, deciding what you claim, if you communicate about it, or if you might choose to stay quiet about it and why. It's all very related to that first question of why you're actually doing this in the first place.
Lest we forget, communication is key.
It is key. Okay, so it's good to have an idea of the milestones in this process, but let's get into some more detail here. As we mentioned, there are a lot of ways that this could go, and we'll just look at a few approaches highlighting different ways that buyers are structuring risk and capital.
Just like the motivations we talked about last episode, they're not mutually exclusive. The approaches that we're about to explore are options for how to move through that chain, from intent to risk to contracts to money. One of the most obvious ways that deals will look different is how a buyer is buying.
Just to pop back to my property purchasing analogy, if I may, are we going to go through an estate agent? Are we going to buy like a new build from developers? Are we just seeing a house that we like the look of, knocking on the door and offering us some money? That is a bold move, and I respect it. Or, heck, we might even just decide to like buy a piece of land and build the property ourselves.
That is the dream.
Well, I'm not surprised that you said that, Tom, because as a CDR project developer, of course you want to go straight to the supplier and build your own adventure. There are going to be challenges, as with any complex purchase, that you'd have to face on your own if you were going through direct project purchase. You've got, a lot of complexity in contracting for one. And if you're not up on like the legalities and procedures of all that, That's going to be pretty daunting. And it's not just about the stuff before signing the deal either. You're going to have to be like in ongoing contact with the supplier with regards to delivery and like managing expectations. Without an intermediary, I imagine that could become quite a difficult process.
Yeah. I mean, CDR projects inherently are complicated. And there's MRV on top, and there's also stuff around credits, issuance, retirements. What happens if things don't go to plan?
That's why for a lot of buyers, going direct to a supplier is the harder path. And it's what led former buyer Paolo Piferetti to shift from a buyer to a facilitator and co-found Climify.
As I went through the journey, the complexity I was exposed to, the risks I had, made it very hard for me to rationalize internally the procurement and the meaningful deployment of funds needed for me to engage with the different CDR suppliers and the CDR ecosystem. And so I very much felt, from a buy side perspective, that I needed a sort of an ally, someone that would align with my interests and that would solve some of the problems I had facing the CDR industry, provide me with the guarantees that I needed to bring back to my board, and basically de-risk the procurement journey for me. And that's how Climify came to be.
For those buyers who can't or don't want to build an internal CDR desk, at least not yet, this is where intermediaries can come in.
Today, where we see most buyers struggle is the fact that we don't have a standardized manner to look at projects. We all know that each project has their own set of risks, but what's very hard for organizations is to understand what those risks are and how these risks compare to others. So providing them with a very clear and standardized manner to assess those risks and then benchmark them accordingly is how we've also been able to onboard new types of buyers to bring new entrants into this market.
It's worth saying that there are several intermediaries across the CDR industry, and you'll hear from more of them as we go through this mini-series. And while they do remove some of the friction of picking and assessing projects, you still have to do the work of picking which intermediary, or indeed intermediaries, you want to work with.
True. They're all a little different. So some will have different focuses, different philosophies, and may provide slightly different services. Some operate more as a marketplace, connecting buyers and sellers, others more like portfolio managers. Some focus on durable CDR, while others on a broader range of carbon credits. Some manage things like MRV in-house, while others work with external verifiers.
All this to say, choosing to go the intermediary route isn't necessarily sidestepping a decision-making process, because you do still have to decide which kind of intermediary you want to go with. But it does mean you're delegating some of that responsibility.
To get a sense of what this looks like in practice, we asked B. Huier, Head of Climate at Patch, and Brendan Maloney, Head of Sustainability at DocuSign, what this process can feel like for a buyer entering the carbon removal market for the first time. Patch is one of our coalition members, and DocuSign is one of their customers.
So I am a new buyer to CDR. I have been at DocuSign for a little over 2 years. And before that was in healthcare and with some other Fortune 500 companies, not buying any carbon credits or CDR. And so this has been a new landscape for me. And so it's been a big learning experience. I think one of the challenges that I deal with is being over inundated with people asking or reaching out or trying to set up a meeting or talk over their projects and things like that. And they're all really super interesting and I want to learn, but it can get a little overwhelming from a just new person's perspective of how many meetings you take, what do you need to know. And so it's been great to have a partner or guides through that process, just especially being someone new within the buying area.
Other friction and challenges that we see, especially new entrants in the market face, is this inundation. And it's across multiple work streams, right? There's the who do I even talk to and prioritize in terms of the the pathways and technology types that are interesting, but also values aligned to the corporate that you represent. And then within the constraints that we have, whether that's budget or timing and delivery of credits, how does that work into a strategy that also supports a business case within DocuSign or within the organizations that are tightly holding on to their capital? And so I think multitude of data points, availability, tonnage, standards, the integrity question, and then fitting that into a strategy is what we often see newer entrants into the market say, where do I begin? And how do I really kind of distill the opportunity that Carbon Markets provides for our corporate climate action in a way that's actionable and trusted and can really help further the corporate climate agenda?
And I can say from a customer perspective, it's been much more pleasant than trying to figure out all the different projects on my own. And so like having that conversation around values, narrowing down a portfolio, it's like going to a restaurant and you're at a diner and there's 5,000 different menu options and you have 50 different waiters and you're trying to figure it out. It's much easier if you have one waiter, a few different menu items, and you can kind of go through and have that conversation of maybe I don't want pickles on this sandwich and make that decision versus like trying to select from that giant menu.
What's striking from this example is that this isn't just a transactional sort of relationship. Intermediaries aren't only helping a buyer buy. Ideally, they're helping them to interpret a market that can feel overwhelming or confusing, even to sustainability professionals. And that matters because, as Brendan and Bea make clear, the bottleneck for new buyers is often not about willingness, but simply working out where to begin. Let's start from the very beginning. What a good place to start.
And some buyers work with more than one intermediary to serve different purposes. Wise, who we heard from last episode, participates with Frontier, a buyers' coalition that aggregates demand and signs long-term deals with suppliers. They also work with Opna, one of our coalition members, and a platform that helps source and evaluate individual projects. Here's Carolyn.
So how we look at it is through tech-based solutions and nature-based solutions. So Frontier was very much tech-based solution. It's an ETF model. They manage it really well. They do all the due diligence of the projects, much like Opna does. But because of the high threshold of technology, like I don't understand it, I'm going to just trust them. And so they provide us with insights on how the projects work, et cetera, and I share that. With Opna, with Schultz, we have a really good relationship of discussing the projects. They really helped us, like Schultz and the team really helped us in our thinking, also answering more nitty-gritty questions, such as like, what is the state of the market? What is the market going to look like in 5 years? How do you even build the contracts? Like very technical legal stuff at times, or technical carbon stuff. And honestly, like forever grateful for like Opna and their team to help us on the specialization of this journey, because I've also learned a lot with Schultz and who really has held my hand through this process. But conversations we have, for example, is about future offtakes. Like that's quite risky, especially if you're looking at like 5+ year horizons. So there we have to calibrate sort of, okay, how risky do we want to be if, for example, a technology fails or they're not able to deliver the carbon credits, especially in these emerging markets we're working in. And that's still a lot of ongoing conversations. But something we calibrate internally on is the impact we want to have versus, say, just like pure carbon credits. Like, what is the balance there? So our thinking there is still being developed, and it's still an active conversation we have as an internal committee. And then Schultz and the Opna team come in with their insights on market, contract structuring, and they're very real, pragmatic conversations, which I really appreciate.
Having been on both the intermediary and the developer side, I would say that if you're making your first moves in CDR as a buyer, it's always going to be helpful to work with an intermediary. Once you've got your feet under the table or you're a much more experienced buyer, then you may want to choose a different path. But intermediaries and marketplaces exist to bring more buyers to the table and to demystify this space. And so there's inherent value there.
So we've got an idea of the options for how to buy. Now let's look at what to buy.
Yes, we're going to need to narrow it down from just buying CDR. There's obviously decisions around removal methods, durability, and so on.
I suppose this comes back to that all-important question of what you want to achieve with your CDR purchase.
We noticed this already last episode. It's going to dictate where you want to direct your money, what you prioritize, and what level of risk you're willing to take. Remember Adam from TerraSet last episode? TerraSet is an organisation founded specifically to funnel philanthropic funds into CDR. You'll remember that TerraSet wants to provide catalytic capital to help the industry grow.
It's a space that has both a supply and a demand problem, right? We need more demand and we need more suppliers, and we need both of those to grow and help each other build to ultimately get to the multi-gigaton solution we need.
And this analysis of the problem informs where they put their money. They're focused on places where their funds will have catalytic impact. And importantly, despite being philanthropic, rather than just give grants, TerraSet still wants to make purchases.
Yeah, I like that. It signals real confidence in what they're backing and helps businesses become more viable as well.
Totally. It's about building legitimacy and, as you say, sending a clear message to the market.
The big barrier we see is mostly capital. The main issue in this space is people are trying to build things that are new and they're unproven and they will take time to deliver, and the revenue might be multiple years down the line. And in a world where capital isn't necessarily cheap and it isn't easy to just access debt capital, and venture capital might not always be suitable for, the makeup of a particular project, and lenders can be risk averse in a new space, and all these other challenges that come with securing capital, that's a key barrier that we're trying to move.
Crucially, however, the way in which TerraSet buys is also informed by this belief.
We pre-purchase rather than make grants or the other ways we could deploy capital, because it moves money now, because it is revenue on companies' balance sheets. It makes them more attractive to investors. It makes them more attractive to lenders. It is a market signal that we think ultimately has the greatest role in helping companies move from A to B right now.
Yes, it sounds like the projects that Adam is buying from aren't necessarily mature businesses. They need capital, they need cash flow in order to scale and to unlock further finance.
And a pre-purchase is one way to help facilitate this. TerraSet recognizes that having catalytic impact is not just about the fact that you're buying, it's also about when you're paying. This is a problem for both individual companies and the wider market. Here's Ibrahim Sawar, co-founder and COO of carbon insurer Artio.
Let's say you get an offtake, big, fancy, shiny offtake. It's worth, 100 million. It's from one of the biggest buyers in the market, but that's payment on delivery, right? So it's a fantastic thing, really great for the market, really great for the ecosystem. But today, you now have a project that people like, that if you produce the credits for, they will pay $100 million for. Fantastic. But you do also need money today. The buyers and banks would wait 6 months, 12 months, 24 months to deploy capital, at which point the project misses milestones because they don't have capital. And then the buyer or the bank goes, see, we told you, it's missing capital, right? You ended up in this cycle.
Gosh, that really sounds like hell for a project developer. What a nightmare.
Trust me, it really is. I can't labour the point enough of how valuable something like an early pre-purchase can be for a business. Take my biochar company, for example. Our pilot was able to launch purely off the back of a small pre-purchase from an architectural firm in the UK. And our first commercial facility has managed to secure additional financing really off the back of a larger catalytic pre-purchase. Stay tuned.
Oh, that sounds like a little tease for some Grounded episodes, Tom. Very exciting. Yeah, and in this case, purchasing isn't so much about procurement as it is market building. You're not just buying tons, you're trying to create future tons.
Indeed.
So it's great for growing projects. But what are the risks for the buyer?
There are definitely some risks. Delivery risk for one. This young business that is being supported via pre-purchase might fail, or the project might not deliver as much as expected or in the time frame as expected. Alongside that, there's early stage technology risk. The technology itself might prove to be less reliable than hoped. And I suppose there are the optics of paying upfront. If you're a corporate buyer, your investors or your board members might see this as an unacceptable financial risk.
Okay, there are a few words and phrases that we've been throwing around here that we're just kind of assuming everyone knows the definitions of and the differences of.
Yes.
So maybe we could just do the tiniest, quickest little mini language check-in, if you will.
Emily, it wouldn't be the carbon removal show without it.
The carbon removal show?
The carbon removal show.
Okay.
Emily's language chat. Yeah.
Okay, Adam mentioned pre-purchases and Ibs mentioned offtakes, both phrases around how you structure the deal. Offtake agreement is a contract to buy a specific volume of future tons, usually over a period of time. The offtake agreement will define price, delivery schedule, and remedies. It's about the legal structure of the whole deal.
All clear.
Great. Then there's pre-purchase. This is also an agreement or contract. In this case, the capital is paid upfront before delivery. This can happen with an offtake agreement, but not all offtakes are fully prepaid.
My hunger for language has been satiated. Thank you,
For
Emily.
now.
For now, exactly. Paying that capital up front and absorbing the risk associated with that may all be part of the plan for a philanthropic buyer. But ultimately, this mode of buying is not going to work for everyone.
Of course. There's a whole spectrum of buyers and potential buyers out there, as we've said, and many will want to participate in the market without overexposing themselves to risk. Totally understandable and legitimate.
The way we see it is we see three main types of buyers when looking at the CDR space.
Here's Paolo again from Climify, explaining how he understands this spectrum.
On the one hand, we have the buyers with a very clear CDR strategy. So they've set a clear net zero goal, and they know which part of their residual emissions will be covered by durable CDRs. And then on the other end, what you have are the organizations that are more looking at it from a purely contributive perspective. So looking at ways to be catalytic, the idea being that, really help us broaden the spectrum of technologies so that we can best find which are the technologies and the projects best fit to scale to the size we need them to. And then in the middle, what you have is what we call VCM buyers. So they have a net zero goal, they have a certain strategy, but instead of kind of building up their whole procurement strategy around getting CDR credits delivered at a specific time frame, they are already gradually offsetting, counterbalancing their emissions. And they've been doing so initially with avoidance offset. And as they move forward in time, they gradually phased out avoidance, moved into nature-based removals. And what we're seeing now is that they're also now gradually phasing nature-based removals out and moving towards the more durable kinds of removals. And so these are buyers that already have a certain experience, and that as they grow, refine their strategy and build stronger internal cases, if you will.
You can immediately see that where you sit on this spectrum shapes how you'll want to manage risk and your tolerance for uncertainty. It's promising to hear that it's not only like thrill-seeking risk junkies who can participate in purchasing CDR. You don't have to be like, on the adrenaline of the risk.
Though they are the entertaining ones.
Of course.
But yes, catalytic buyers may be able to tolerate concentrated exposure to the early stage landscape, with all the risks and excitement that it holds. But once you move into the net zero or the VCM camps, the question becomes less how do we catalyze, and more how can we contribute whilst managing our exposure.
Our main concern is, okay, should a stream fail, what guarantees, what insurances do we have in place to make up for that potential loss? And so with those contracts that we signed with that organizations, we were able to also include optionality to build bandwidth so that should one stream fail, we would be able to rapidly realign on another and make up for the potential loss.
Obviously, we cannot avoid risk entirely, and this approach isn't even about that. It's about ensuring that there are protections against those risks should they occur.
In practice, this could mean a few things that may look different depending on which intermediary you've gone with. It might include spreading exposure across different technologies or suppliers, delivery timelines or regions, so that no single failure derails the strategy. Or building flexibility into contracts so that buyers can adjust volumes or redirect commitments if circumstances change. It could also look like creating buffer capacity within the portfolio, so if one stream slips, another can compensate.
These approaches described by Adam and Paolo do look different, but I feel like when approaching risk, both these pathways have impact at their heart. The first route focuses on the survival of early projects in order to unlock supply. The latter works to sustain capital moving through the space to ensure tons can keep on being delivered. Longevity, you know?
And as we've mentioned, we need all kinds of buyers going down all kinds of routes for the industry to thrive. Of course, none of this how to buy, what to buy, why to buy matters without money.
Money, money, money.
Must be funny.
Money, money. Money, money, money.
That could be considered the real step one. You need budget. Where's this money going to come from? How much do you have to spend? How are you determining the budget?
As we discussed last time, making the leap to purchasing CDR is often about convincing a lot of internal stakeholders, using whatever language or motivations will best speak to them. But that multi-departmental complexity does not end once you've got buy-in. Because inside a company, carbon removal still has to make its way through procurement, legal, and contract processes that might just not be built for something like this. Here's Brendan and B again.
I think our procurement team is used to, let's just save money, let's reduce these contracts. And my goal is to let's purchase more carbon removals or carbon credits. And so it's this whole back and forth of like, how are they doing their job and understanding that more is better in this case for us, and we can use them over time and attribute them to our emissions. But it's just a little counterintuitive, and it makes sense. It's just a little different from everyday procuring of a sandwich at our community. So
Yeah, I would add in sort of as we think about the buyer's journey, we've talked a bit about the strategy already, and that's really predicated on business case. Why are we spending precious capital on a voluntary market? But once they think you've set that, then the sourcing can be really overwhelming. You know, what is the procurement framework?
All of this is super important because the next challenge is not just picking a credible option, it's translating that option into something a company actually knows how to purchase. And the old way of figuring out this sort of thing doesn't always work with CDR, as we've discussed previously. This historic offsetting model in a way worked because it gave you the volume, but effectively what you were really trying to do was find the cheapest offsets you could get to offset that quantity. And those were never going to be high quality CDR.
Yeah, that's true. So what are some options for calculating this if we're not talking strictly volume to offset? I imagine each company is doing something a little bit different, right?
As with all of this, there isn't a standard model yet, and different approaches will work well in different contexts, but an increasingly common mechanism is internal carbon pricing.
You mean it's the carbon inside of us that really counts?
Yes. Let's humour that.
It's the carbon inside of us that counted all along?
All that 20%, that 20% of carbon inside of us.
Are we only 20% carbon?
Yeah.
Gosh, I would have said more than that. Okay, tell me what it actually means, please.
So, put simply, a company puts a price on the carbon they're emitting internally. They then charge teams for what they emit, and it'll come out of each department's budget. That money then is ring-fenced and specifically deployed however the company's carbon strategy indicates, like buying removals.
Nice. So carbon emissions become a consideration for all aspects of the business, even or maybe especially in their financial planning. I guess you'll never forget about it that way. I certainly wouldn't.
They work with a version of this method at Klarna. Alex Farsan, who we heard from last episode, explains how it works for them.
Essentially, what we do is on an annual basis, we levy an internal carbon fee on our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. We have a staggered rate there. So scope 1 and 2 emissions are $200 per ton. Business travel emissions are $100 per ton. And other scope 3 emissions are $10 per ton. And then we have an annual sum that we then use to support different types of climate projects. That's since the last 5 years, since we started, that's been over 8 million.
Woo! That's some big bucks. We're talking serious money here, Tom. I really like the staggered approach as well, like drawing in all the company's emissions with considerations for different use cases. And also with an ongoing timeline. So sustainability managers aren't like scrambling for budget approval every year and having to have that awkward conversation with their CFOs that we talked about last time.
Yeah, it forces climate into the P&L conversations across the organisation. And just like external carbon taxes, it can provide an incentive to decarbonise.
Yeah, it's a cool system.
And for Klarna, that pool of capital is deployed through a dedicated vehicle.
We do this via the Climate Transformation Fund that we started together with our partner Milky Wire. And I think what's important here is that this is an opportunity for us to support the solutions that are necessary to meet global net zero. So we have our own net zero target, but we think like it's also our role to support global net zero solutions. And this Climate Transformation Fund has 3 pillars. There's the decarbonization pillar that contains certain projects. There's a nature conservation and protection pillar that has certain projects, and there's a carbon removal pillar. And what we're really trying to cover there is what we think is the broader transition that needs to happen. So we need to decarbonize our economy, we need to protect and restore biogenic carbon stocks, and we need to remove carbon durably from the air. There we really do focus on durable carbon solutions. And in the last 5 years, we've supported 60 startups, usually very early stage. And in very many cases, we're the first buyers. And what's unique there is that we have what we call a catalytic approach. So we're really trying to seed as many different technology pathways as we can, giving them runway and seeing which ones stick. And what that means for us, though, is that we need to be quite risk tolerant and quite cost tolerant. And that's really where we see our place in the space at the moment, is that we give upfront money. So these are pre-purchases to startups that have novel ideas, that have innovative approaches, and try and help them get off the ground and develop proof points for these different technologies. And yeah, so since 2021, we've spent, I think, 4 million on, I would say, about 26,000 tons of CDR, and all of them are as pre-purchase.
It sounds like this has been a great approach for Klarna, allowing them to drive significant funds towards both CDR and other climate projects as well.
And internal carbon pricing is proving a popular approach for companies who are serious about CDR. Patch actually co-wrote a report last year with Boston Consulting Group and the University of Oxford on setting a net zero aligned carbon price. B. Huier, who we heard from earlier, contributed to that report. So we spoke to her to understand more about how internal carbon prices are taking off and some best practices.
We partnered with the University of Oxford and BCG, Boston Consulting Group, to put this paper into practice. And what Oxford Offsetting Principles has done for, creating an aligned net zero portfolio, we wanted to take that same kind of momentum and concept and do it for internal carbon pricing. So what are the principles and how do you stand up an internal carbon price within your organization? Because everything flows from there. Once you've basically said, this is the price that we will effectively use to make business decisions, encapsulating the negative externality, which is our emissions, and how we will account for that in every investment and every growth opportunity. And so it really boils down to what model and starting point makes the most sense. You don't have to jump all the way to, an explicit carbon fee. Although if you can make that case to do so, excellent, because it's real dollars behind every decision. You can start with a shadow or an implied carbon price and start to move and do the organizational behavioral change where you're thinking about what would it cost if we fully encapsulated, carbon into this decision to continue operating with diesel or not electrifying our fleet or investing in other decarbonization measures in your scope 1 and 2 or even 3, depending on the footprint of your business. But I think it's laying out these options and having the key principles of being committed and practical and science-based to set an internal carbon price that allows for you to then create an accessible budget to fund things like carbon credits and high integrity climate action.
And as we said up top, this is one option of many. Some organizations might allocate finance to CDR through dedicated sustainability budgets that are approved at board level, for example, or they may have a figure tied to profit or revenue rather than for their emissions.
Yeah, like Alidade, who we had a great episode with back in Series 2.
Exactly. This is the approach that Wise takes.
We increased it this year. It was 0.1% of revenue. Now it's 0.16% of revenue. This is in the annual report. We're very public about this. And as we continue growing as a company and we work with more customers across the globe, it's really good to align that growth with our product growth, with our company growth.
Tying your CDR finance to revenue rather than profit doesn't leave your CDR budget at the mercy of the company's profitability. And as Carolyn highlights, it allows your contribution to grow with your business.
Yeah, both the Klarna model and the Wise model have clear methodologies for allocating funds and a mechanism that all but guarantees that as long as their businesses are operating and as long as these internal policies are in place, their contributions will continue.
We've heard lots of ways that buyers are buying CDR, but I think we've seen how every stage of this process introduces uncertainty or challenges.
After this episode, Tom, I'm a little bit in your camp from last episode of it is wild that people are going through this whole rigmarole.
Good word.
Rigmarole.
I mean, the whole concept of tying your budget to your revenue stream.
Yeah. It's
so impressive. It's so
immense,
impressive that that some companies do this. Because they could be losing money, but they still have the same amount that they need to dedicate to their climate pots each year.
Yeah. And also, I think the fact that there's no dominant model for this yet. It's not like you can say, oh, well, I'll just look at how somebody else is doing it and I'll follow that path, because that might be the path they've chosen because it's good for them. Or it might be the path that they've chosen because it was what was available to them at the time. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be right for you and your needs and your expectations. And it's almost as if, particularly with the early buyers of CDR or the early buyers of newer technology, that constantly having to build their path as they go. And it's a lot of work, honestly. It's a lot of work for the buyers. It's a lot of work for the intermediaries to support that. It's a lot of work for the suppliers to kind of support their buyers through that as well. They're involved in this process just as much as the buyers are. And it's kind of a lot of work for everyone. Honestly, personally, I am feeling very grateful for any buyer who has stuck their neck out, taken money out of their probably hard-earned budget and gone, I think this is going to go towards something that feels quite uncertain and a bit risky, and who knows actually how it's going to work out because the process is all higgledy-piggledy. But hey, we'll do it anyway. I kind of don't know if I'd have the energy for that right now. But it is really necessary. So I'm just really grateful to all the buyers and the facilitators of that buying process for getting it over the line,
No doubt, if there was a more frictionless and less bespoke way to do this, then we'd have more buyers.
Oh, 100%.
But that's just the way that the market is right now. So hats off to those buyers that currently exist, that are paving the way for a more templated approach.
And it makes sense because I think every market is like that in the beginning to a certain extent, particularly with complex markets that have a lot of complexities to take into consideration. I think it always starts with a bit of well, I don't know how we can do this. We're going to do it this way, this way, this way, this way. So it's not surprising to me that it's not super clear and easy right now.
because we're just at that stage.
Yeah.
And I'm really hoping that the next stage of like, it's clear and easy is coming soon.
I mean, I hope so. I hope so, for the developers' sake. Because as Ibs mentioned earlier in the show, this friction-heavy, complex buying space means that there's this vicious cycles for developers where they need early capital, but the buyers want certainty, and then the banks want to look at the collateral and what is this there, and the boards want defensibility, and so it ends up not really landing with the developer who needs the money in the first place.
Yeah. So in our next episode, the final of our little mini-series, we're going to be looking at how the market is building those tools that we need to make this an easier, slicker, less complex process. How do we make buying a better experience and make it work at scale? See you then.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Carbon Removal Show.
Please subscribe if you haven't already and follow us. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Threads. It helps so much.
And if you could do me this one favour, share this podcast with a friend or a colleague who might resonate with this episode.
A huge thank you to all our coalition members, without whom the Carbon Removal Show would not be possible.
B0, Carbon Engineering, Carbon Gap, Carbon Future,
ClimeFi, Ivotama, Klarna, Matchmakes,
Milky Wire, Negative Emissions Platform, Opna,
Patch, Pinwheel, Plan Boo, Recarber,
Sebastian Manhart, Standard Gas Technologies, Supercritical, and Offstream.
If you or your company are interested in joining this amazing coalition, please get in touch.
The Carbon Removal Show is hosted by me, Tom Praviti.
And me, Emily Swaddle.
And produced by me, Ben Weaver-Hinks.